Afternoon, ladies and gents. It's the 29th of May 2024. This is only my second video, and we'll be covering the last 5 months' activities regarding the Ukraine war in a super condensed fashion. There's a lot to cram in, and I want to try and get it done as quickly as possible. However, there's going to be, I won't say boring content, but there's going to be that kind of mundane information that some people might not even be interested in, but it's just important to get it out there because it will help support conversations on any sort of videos preceding this one. The aim here is to let you know what's happening so far in terms of military movements, political decisions, and other matters about the war. Just to give a heads up for those of you that are sort of unaware, I will be presenting some slides and sort of article contents during this session, so you know there'll be something to look at on the screen instead of just listening to my voice rambling on. I'm new to YouTube, as you'll know from my first video, and you're just going to have to sort of bear with me as I kind of get used to a new way of doing things. I want to try and sort of bring you all up to speed with what's been happening certainly over the last 5 months. We're rapidly sort of run through some, but not all of the events, as opposed to having a general chat. So this time round, I won't be providing any views or comments on any of the listed points or activities sort of covered in this session. But I'm sure we'll have a chance to in other videos for future reference. Apologies in advance for the lack of technology, as I'll be throwing up some news articles or clips up onto the screen throughout this session. Let's quickly go back to the 24th of February 2022, when Russia crossed the Ukrainian border, and up until now we have seen many things happen, various battles across Ukraine with Russian military, the gaining and loss of territory for both sides. We've seen and heard politicians around the world stand up and support both sides, believe it or not. We saw the West's immediate response, implementing many sort of business and financial sanctions affecting much of Russia. We've seen the seizing of assets and funds for individuals and businesses who have been associated with Russia in one shape or form. Honestly, though, that was really only the beginning. But to be honest, the two countries have been in conflict with each other since at least 2014, when Russia began to occupy Crimea, marking the beginning of the Russo-Ukraine war, which also kicked off on the 24th of February, but back in 2014, believe it or not. So I hated history at school. I didn't see the point in sort of being taught about events from the past, and was only really interested in what was happening tomorrow and in the future. However, I have learnt over the last couple of years that to better understand what's happening now and in the future, history can hold some of those answers, which couldn't be more true during sort of times of conflict and war. This war's forced me to look at and sort of better understand the two previous world wars fought before this one. I wanted to sort of understand what kicked those wars off. How did they start? What was the end game? And who were the winners and losers? Now, I'm not going to go into them too much, but instead I just want to provide a sort of 1 to 2 minute overview of those two wars for those of you that are interested, as it's, like I say, it's going to kind of be pretty important for today's content. The aim here, quickly, is just to try and identify any signs and signals with the run up to both the First World War and the Second World War that could be similar and evident today, indicating a possible Third World War. So we've become a civilization now that seems to only be interested in the here and now. If it's not happening right now, then there's nothing to worry about kind of attitude. But let me get one thing clear here. I believe we're living in sort of very fragile times right now. Not in a couple of years' time, but now. There just seems to be too much sort of movement happening I suppose around us, not around us here in the UK necessarily. Um, but with with the access of information online, there shouldn't really be any excuse to not be in the know. Hence the reason, really, for me kicking off this channel. And I hope to really sort of provide the viewers with meaningful information highlighting, what seems to be, to me, war preparations. Anyway, where was I? As I said, this is not going to be a history lesson. Just a couple of pointers of, possible signs and signals. But history does have a habit of sort of repeating itself. So, long story short, the landscape across Europe has changed a lot over the last 120 years, especially during World War One and World War Two, in terms of who then and now sort of owns which territories. Some of the countries that were around today weren't around sort of back then in the early 1900s. And the enemies of today were comrades from the past actually fighting alongside each other. Lithuania came onto the map as late as 1991. When I say that, I mean the independence for Lithuania. And with the Iron Curtain coming down on the USSR, the western part of Russia sort of spurred the birth of independence for Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Belarus, and the Ukraine in 1992. So we can start to see why Putin says that some, if not all of those countries belong to Russia. The only changes to landscape sort of since then has been in Serbia and also Russia taking back sort of Crimea back in 2014. And it's only really been sort of recently that I'm learning what the Iron Curtain was. I'd heard of it and everything else, but I didn't realize that it was literally a physical structure representing the Iron Curtain sort of dividing the USSR and Europe. So I told you I wasn't interested in history at school, hence the reason why I'm, not knowledgeable in that area. And this is where history can provide us with an insight into, why these sort of conflicts have happened and are they likely to happen again in the future. So in Putin's eyes, they, or Russia, over the last 75 years of what seems to have lost control of a lot of territory, with the West and its influences sort of scooping up those lost lands and continuing to sort of advance east. Many of those countries in the Eastern Bloc of the then sort of USSR are now sort of independent and have joined the EU and or NATO. So remember, the landmass of Russia is huge, but only has a population of about 144 million, I believe, of which occupies most of the western part of Russia, which neighbours Europe. But to everyone's surprise, anyway, Germany didn't surrender, but succumbed to an agreement at the end of World War One. That being the armistice at 11 a.m. on the 11th day of the 11th month back in 1918, which ultimately led to the foundations being laid for World War Two. And then, because of what happened in World War One, the Allies formed what was known back then as the League of Nations, which had a purpose to ensure that countries like Germany could not conduct themselves as seen in World War One, and also to weaken Germany as a nation. Germany's landscape also changed during those times, with I think some 12% land losses, allowing gains and alliances to form in Poland, France, Lithuania, and again more changes to territory. So just a couple of points on that. The landscape today has already changed. Russia gaining and annexing sort of more of Ukraine's land as they continue to do so on a daily basis. So the potential of Europe's landscape changing even further is more than possible, with Putin sort of suggesting that he's prepared to sacrifice Kaliningrad. So I'm not sure who that would go to. And we have Transnistria in Moldova requesting to be annexed by Putin. So I don't know how that would work. They've kind of requested it, but nothing's been heard of since. And Belarus could easily fall victim to be split up into parts by any of the surrounding countries, that being Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and of course Russia. We could even go further to say that if a full-scale world war erupts, then the landscape along, I suppose, the entire Russian border with Europe would change. We then had the Wall Street crash in 1929. The world was plunged into economic turmoil, and Germany was hit hard. The American banks withdrew the loans that they had made to Germany, and their economy pretty much collapsed overnight. So businesses closed at an alarming rate. And by 1933, unemployment had reached 6 million, with many left homeless and thousands of children sort of died of malnutrition. So let's just look at what's happening today in relation to that. So the global economy around the world is being hit hard. Currencies are weakening. There's a lot of talk about the US dollar collapsing. The Chinese yen and Russian ruble are also weak. The price of critical commodities going up. That being the price of things like gold, and soon the price of oil, no doubt. Both of which have been, or both of those commodities have an adverse sort of impact on global markets. So, it's kind of it looks like a similar potential financial collapse on the horizon. Only this looks like it could be, a lot bigger than the Wall Street crash, shall we say. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is I'm kind of looking at signs and signals that happened back then, and is any of that evident today? With the lack of government resolve and sort of out of despair, many people then turn to alternative sort of political leaders. And the rise of Adolf Hitler was born, with his encouraging speeches to a weakened nation back then. The November criminals, or what were known as the November criminals, that signed off the armistice at the end of World War One, that being mainly the socialists and communists, and also the Jewish bankers that plotted to sort of destroy and undermine the German state, were all held accountable by Hitler. As a result, Hitler's plan was to restructure and rebuild the German Empire, which meant ultimately eliminating those sort of unwanted influences from, its previous enemies, and plans were then being made to start World War II. Germany's first target was Poland, as they invaded the country with 57 divisions, which consisted of over 1 million soldiers, ultimately destroying the Polish armed forces. So with that, France, Britain, Italy, and Australia then declared war on Germany, and off it all went. Germany also lost that war when surrendering in May 1945. So again, we have to, we have to kind of look at Putin sort of invading the Ukraine for the second time in my era. Massive amount of troops and military hardware being repositioned across the whole of Europe, with NATO strengthening its defences as we speak. I'm going to leave it there with a history lesson. But I just wanted to highlight the importance of previous wars, how they played out, and just whether there's any sort of telltale signs from then being played out now. Um, Times are obviously different today as they were, compared to what they were, back then, either 50, 100, 50, 75 or 100 years ago. But like I say, I'm just kind of, I think along the lines of logic, and I just kind of look at similarities, and is the same thing happening again? Let's get one thing straight here, before I go any further. 9 times out of 10, we've fought for two reasons. It's either territory and or religion. Independence plays a big part here as well, with smaller countries and land masses wanting to break away from, whatever alliance they're sort of governed by, hence the birth of many of these new countries across Europe. Not too long ago, actually. The world wars mentioned just now are territorial. The war in the Middle East is, quite frankly, in my view, over religion, amongst other things, such as, I don't know, the fights against terrorism, and of course the minerals of the land. The war, when it breaks out between China and Taiwan, will be over land again. And let's not forget why North and South Korea hate each other. Both nations claim the entire Korean peninsula as being theirs, being split into two by both the US and Russian occupying forces at the end of the Second World War. I just want to give you a quick note on sort of North and South Korea, or their situation. I didn't know actually. During 1951, the US started a bombing campaign deliberately targeting civilians on the Korean Peninsula. During that Korean War, North and South Korea became the most heavily bombed countries in history. In fact, the tonnage of bombs sort of dropped on Korea was roughly the equivalent to all of the bombs dropped across the entire Pacific theater during World War II, which included the two atomic bombs. The US entered the Korean War after North Korea fully invaded South Korea, capturing Seoul and nearly the entire Korean peninsula. So during that war, the US had destroyed 145,000 buildings. So you can see why the North Koreans have built complete cities underground. Thousands of civilians were killed from the use of napalm bombs. And then the US then, once they'd run out of those targets, they then sort of set their sights on the Korean hydro dams across the country, destroying many of them, causing their lands to be flooded, therefore preventing 75% of Koreans from growing their stable diet of rice. So the aim there was to literally starve the nation. Because nothing was left left over for the civilians, they then just started digging and creating homes underground. So whether those tensions present in Korea today are overland, or whether those tensions are just sort of influenced by China and Russia supporting North Korea and the US supporting the South, maybe it's just actually the superpowers using Korea as a proxy for their own gains, similar to what Putin's doing today in the Ukraine, using the Ukraine as a proxy for its gains. With all that in mind, let me just run through some of those telltale signs that have kind of been happening over the last 5 months or so over just across Europe. These signs are shown between three major players, that being Russia, the Ukraine, and NATO. Ukraine actually is the middleman of the fight, and it just seems at the moment that the real fight is between Russia and NATO, and is simply being fought over land once again. Right, so whilst we're here, I'm not going to be insulting anybody's intelligence, but I've heard people talk about NATO in conversations without really sort of knowing what it is or what it stands for. So I'm just going to take a couple minutes of your time just to provide you with a quick overview of what NATO is, as it's kind of important to understand now, especially if it's if it's one of the alliances that are currently going to be involved in this fight or this war or this conflict. And it's going to be important for up and coming videos, and also just to allow you to be prepared for any conversations you may have, with others on this subject. The United Kingdom is a member of NATO, which stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. There are currently 32 countries a member of the NATO alliance, and it's exactly that, an alliance. The purpose of the role of NATO is as follows, with a focus on the eastern part of the alliance first, because that's where the conflict currently is. So this information that I'm going to read out to you comes directly from the NATO website. So I'm just going to read a couple of the key points out to you, if that's all right. So NATO's purpose is to guarantee the freedom and security of its members through political and military means. The member countries, of which there are 32, known as the NATO allies, and forms the Transatlantic Security Alliance. Basically, a group of countries really with a common interest coming together to form a group, ensuring that they all have each other's backs in protecting those common interests, I suppose. Due to the threats from Russia, at the 2022 NATO summit in Madrid, the Allies agreed to scale up the multinational battle groups from battalions to brigade size where and when required. Allies are now exercising the ability to deploy rapidly available reinforcements in order to expand the battle groups to brigade-size formations. So just to give you a heads up on those numbers, a battalion consists of 4 to 6 companies and can include around 1,000 soldiers. And a brigade is a number of battalions consisting of anywhere between 3,000 and 5,000 soldiers. NATO's military presence in the eastern part of the alliance is key to its strengthening deterrence and defence posture, which has been enhanced in recent years to reflect the new security reality in the Euro-Atlantic area. Russia's illegal and illegitimate annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the full-scale invasion of the Ukraine in 2022 has fundamentally changed the security environment in Europe, and NATO has responded by significantly strengthening its readiness to protect and defend all allies. The forward presence of Allied forces is defensive, proportionate, transparent, and in line with the Alliance's international commitments and obligations. It represents a significant commitment by allies and is a tangible reminder that an attack on one NATO ally is an attack on all. Allies have also agreed to boost NATO's ability to reinforce its forces in the East by developing more repositioned equipment and weapon stockpiles, more forward deployed capabilities, including integrated air and missile defense systems, strengthened command and control, and they've upgraded what they call regional defense plans, which it provides specific forces to be sort of pre-assigned to the defense of sort of specific allies. Right, let me just say that again. It allows allies to support each other, basically. So if you've got a weaker country and and they get attacked and they have sort of stronger alliance countries or allies around them, they kind of just work with each other. They kind of help each other by pre-assigning equipment, resources, personnel, hardware, everything else. NATO's evolution has increased its military presence in the eastern part of the alliance as a direct result of Russia's behavior, which reflects a pattern of aggression against its neighbors and the wider transatlantic community. Russia is the most significant and direct threat to Allied security and to peace and stability in the Euro-Atlantic area. And that will do on NATO. I just wanted to kind of get that out there for anyone that's interested. Like I say, there's plenty of people talking about NATO, but don't even know really what it's about, what it means. They know that it's a fighting force, but to what degree. You can go directly to the NATO's website to sort of learn more about the alliance or member countries, task force formations, groups, changes, security, things like that. And of course, any decisions made at any of these NATO summits, they've all been recorded and they're all on there, published or presented on their site. Right, I'm just going to run through some of these signs and signals based on kind of activities, decisions, military movements, and political announcements, which I would consider signs for war preparations, but feel free to comment. Over the last, I'm going to say 5 months, over the last 5 months now, Poland have been arming up their military to the teeth. And with that, they're becoming Europe's largest military, with NATO ploughing massive amounts of military equipment into the country and along Poland's border with Belarus. We've had the Russians and other countries repositioning military assets across the landscape with the relocation of air defense systems from Kaliningrad back to Russia, and Germany moving its Patriot defense systems from Poland back into, or not back into, but into the Ukraine. We've had Russia saying that they are preparing to sacrifice Kaliningrad in favor of protecting their motherland. Whilst they are sort of deploying intercontinental ballistic missiles along its border. Those missile systems include the nuclear Sarmat missile, the S-500 SAM or surface-to-air missile, and also the positioning of anti-satellite defense systems, as well as the Russians testing nuclear-powered prototypes, Poseidon nuclear submarine missiles, and the Kinzhal and Zircon hypersonic missiles. We've seen Belarus receiving weapons from Russia and placing them along their border. Belarus and Russian troop buildups along the border of Lithuania and Poland. Russia have been running nuclear war drills, simulating sort of different catastrophic scenarios. They've been upgrading their nuclear bunkers across the country in key locations, and they've also been stockpiling radiation pills. There's been the testing of the EAM, or the Emergency Alert Message System, that sends out emergency messages to its population via either a mobile phone or a TV broadcasted networks. To be honest, many countries have been running the same EAM system test. Here in the UK, Europe, and the US actually conducting such an EAM system test across the entire United States, which was for the first time in a long time. NATO have been conducting military exercises in Europe along or close to Russian borders. Steadfast Defender being the more prominent exercise involving over 100,000 soldiers, and naval exercises taking place simulating naval blockades in the Baltic Sea between Finland and Estonia. So many Baltic countries have now shut their borders with Russia, and there have been naval deployments of numerous sort of strike carrier groups and fleets around the Baltics over the last 6 months. I'm not sure what's there now. I'm not currently tracking the movement of naval assets. And whilst there's been a lot of weapons sharing between Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, there's been a massive hike in STRATCOM activity, which is Strategic Command and Joint Forces Command, and the movement of nuclear assets across Europe. We've had F-35 and Typhoon fighter jets conducting takeoff and landing tests on highways and motorways, with the UK running the same drills next year. Those motorway sort of takeoff and landings allows the pilots to still operate if and when a USA Air Force or RAF airbase are sort of taken out by the enemy. We've seen more nuclear weapons arriving into the UK from America over the last 6 months, with 2 squadrons of F-35 stealth fighter bomber jets, approximately 55 jets deployed to the UK from the US, remembering that each of these F-35 stealth fighters are capable of carrying tactical nuclear weapons. US air bases in the UK have been and are still sort of expanding and upgrading to incorporate really the fighter jet maintenance wing. This is so that the UK can maintain and sort of fix those jets during combat sessions and sort of wartime periods. Whilst we're on the subject of military aircraft, there have been B-1, B-2, and B-52 bombers arriving in some European countries for the first time ever. The B-52 Stratofortress is an American long-range subsonic strategic bomber. The B-1 Lancer is a supersonic heavy bomber, and the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, all actually heavy ordnance and nuclear capable sort of aircraft bombers, each capable of delivering massive payloads. And whilst we're on the subject of nuclear warfare or assets, a new stealth bomber has been recently unveiled, I think in the US, the B-21 Raider. NATO nuclear-related exercises conducting across Europe since 2022, with France doing nuclear weapons tests, as well as China, Russia, and the US testing. There's been the complete abandonment of all nuclear treaties, pretty much, and the abandonment of the Conventional Forces Treaty between the East and the Western countries. So these treaties pretty much provide guidelines and rules sort of in and around the research, manufacturing, and use and testing of nuclear weapons between many countries. Now, unfortunately, I'm only really just kind of getting started, but the next lot I can get through quite quickly. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, we need to sort of understand the signals and compare those signs with that from sort of other world wars. We don't have to do that. That's what I'm doing. I'm kind of, there's so much misinformation out there. There's so many people saying, this is happening, that's happening, this might happen, that might happen, and all the rest of it. And we just need to kind of look for signs and signals. If there is any relevance or, any similarities, then they're going to be indicators for us to go, this could be happening, because there's so much misinformation out there. So we don't know, what to take as being gospel and true and accurate and what not. We're ultimately looking for any signs that a new world war is upon us. And to be honest with you, it could be that a new world war sort of started on the 24th of February 2022 when Russia decided to do a Hitler and invade the Ukraine. If not before that, some experts suggest that it started back in 2014 with the invasion of Crimea. And others might even suggest that it started when the Twin Towers were hit back in the early 2000s. To be fair, enemies don't tend to sort of organize a start date for war. However, what they will do is declare war against its enemy. Now, whether a declaration of war is a start date or not, let's just make sure that we can try and identify any signs and signals by sort of being proactive. So if a war is declared, then at least we can say we saw it coming. My videos and content will hopefully highlight some of these signs. And to be honest, unless you're actually looking for the information, you probably won't know much about them. Another point I want to get across before sort of going through these signs is that there are numerous news and information outlets out there on the internet presenting both facts and a load of rubbish. It will be up to you to go through that information and just filter out what is likely to be real and meaningful and what is likely to be a load of crap. Let's not forget that whilst I'm sort of running through these events, I won't be including any of the conflicts kicking off in other parts of the world just yet. Certainly not in this video. These are signs seen in line with a war in sort of Europe. So just over the last 5 months alone, these are the signs I have kind of read about. And if this isn't any kind of indication, then I'm not sure what is. So Germany stationing 5,000 troops for the first time since World War II outside of the NATO bloc, which is a brigade in size. We have NATO and the US have both authorized Ukraine to. Remember, when I go through these are things that have happened over the last sort of 5 months and not necessarily happened today, yesterday, or last week as such. NATO and the US have both authorized the Ukraine to utilize the nuclear capable F-16s to strike sort of deep inside the Russian territory. The second biggest NATO exercise taking place during the sort of high intensity conflict in the region. That would be Steadfast Defender. That was due to finish last week, I think, and that's now been extended to finish in July of sometime, maybe the 15th. Ukraine to mobilize another 500,000 troops to fight on the front lines. There's also been another NATO exercise taking place called Nordic Defense or something like that. Russia is planning on adding 400,000 troops in 2024 before conscription. Ukraine are constructing anti-nuclear radiation shelters under schools across the country. The US are building, they're not actually building, the US are occupying 15 military bases in Finland. Basically what they're doing is they're just forward staging military assets to, you know, bring their presence or NATO presence closer to the Russian border. We have, it says 100,000 there. There's 114,000 Ukrainian troops on the border of Belarus. Putin also orders in a 30-day ration food supply, including baby food for residents in Crimea. The US are sending nuclear weapons to the US Air Force Base in Suffolk in the UK, along with the F-35 delivery systems that I mentioned earlier. Poland is putting military signage on public roadways to abide by, as there's going to be the movement of military equipment and vehicles across the country. Transnistria has called on Russia to annex the territory and become Russian. Ukraine is planning a major counter-offensive in the Black Sea. They're not planning, that's already started, and they're actually quite successful in that operation at the moment. Germany is approving long-range weapon systems for the Ukraine. Russia delivering 4 new Tu-160M Swan nuclear bombers. We've got drastic changes amongst the Ukrainian military command and its personnel, but we've also starting to see those sort of similar changes in the hierarchy amongst the Russian military. Russia has moved over to their own sort of type of internet platform. It's one that's similar to the Chinese style internet. It sort of comes with its own isolated security boundaries, basically. So they're kind of detaching themselves from the West by the sounds of it. That's up to them. Stoneberg, or NATO's representative, has claimed explicitly that Ukraine will become a member of NATO. It's a case of not if, but when. Russian schools are adopting a new nuclear war training curriculum. The UK have procured 500 new military man trucks, which are tracked to be built and delivered by October 2024. I'm not sure whether they are for the UK, for NATO, or for the Ukraine. Russia's Medvedev says any UK troop deployment to Ukraine will be a declaration of war. We've had NATO's Eastern Bloc building hundreds of bunkers and anti-tank ditches. The Baltics are committing to building 1,000 kilometers of fortification bunkers along the entire Russian border. Moldova is running military exercises with the US on Transnistrian border. There are 48 Russian Iskander missile systems along the border of Ukraine, all each capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. Over 1/3 of the Russian Black Fleet naval ships have been destroyed by the Ukraine. It could be more than that. They're doing pretty well in doing that at the moment. Poland has issued another air navigation warning until the 5th of May. That time's obviously lapsed, shall we say. Forget about that. I know what that was about, but it's probably irrelevant now. Kaliningrad intensifying its border security. You have the super rich are currently selling off all of their stocks and purchasing or building bunkers. Private bunker sales are actually exploding across Europe at the moment. Russia has launched a new nuclear submarine. Finland and Sweden, as some of you will know, have joined NATO. So the NATO alliance has expanded. The assassination of Alexei Navalny in jail. Then there was Russia, who has lost more than 10 planes in only less than 2 weeks. That's not the last 2 weeks. That would have been during a period of 2 weeks somewhere. There are no longer any nuclear treaties, as I sort of mentioned before, between the East and the West. We've had Poland has threatened to acquire nuclear weapons. And then the UN chief has said that we've entered an age of chaos. And just a couple of weeks ago, every military commander, defense minister, prime minister, president has in some way been advising to their population to prepare for World War III. Well, we've sort of seen that in the UK. There's three trigger points I'm going to sort of mention quickly for the UK. So we've had the call for an early election. Why? I've got my reasons, but that's a trigger point. Then the publishing of how to deal with an emergency situation onto the government website. And then just a couple of days ago, there was the announcement or the suggestion by the Conservative Party that, if they win, and they won't, but if they do, then they will be thinking about introducing the national service. 3 trigger points, and you can look at those how you will, but if you just look at those now after that long list of should we say signs, movements, and indicators, and I've just got a couple more here for you actually, just on top of this. We've had sort of NATO building up its strike force capability near Kaliningrad as we speak. The president of Belarus, Lukashenko, has called on Belarusians to prepare for World War III. Cyber attacks are intensifying, Kaliningrad intensifying its border security. Russia have said that it's their goal to take the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv, and the port of Odessa. Poland has declared their border to be critical infrastructure, setting the president to remove any or all farmer protests happening on its borders. Well, that's already happened. You don't hear of those protests happening anymore, so they've kind of done that. The border between Russia and Poland continues to be closed. The US are launching hypersonic tracking satellites into space on the same day they announced the warning of the placement of the Russian missiles in space. UK diplomats are being recalled from Russia. Poland routinely scrambling jets responding to Russian missiles which have breached either the Polish border and airspace. There's been the terrorist attack deep inside Russia at the consul. Not sure what relevance that has in terms of the war, but let's not finger point and get into that one. Biden inviting the Polish president and prime minister to go to the US for emergency briefings on strategic matters. We've had Poland banning images of military movements in the eastern parts of the country. An information blackout, basically. They're not allowed to post information or pictures of any military maneuvers. Over 100 targets inside Russia have been hit over the last 100 days. Russian intel claims that an expeditionary force led by the UK is expected to enter western Ukraine within a mere month. Ukraine is stockpiling hundreds of thousands of CBRN gear. That'll be chemical warfare and suits and stuff like that, and also chemical weapon antidotes. Ukraine have declared that they will be absolutely targeting the Crimean Bridge this year. They already have the capability and are just waiting for the right time. Putin recently visited Kaliningrad to reassure the population there that they have Russia's support. And then last but not least, we have Belarus, and this is a curveball. Belarus have said that they will side with Ukraine if Poland gets invaded. Or no, if Poland invades. So I'll take it, if Poland invades Belarus, then they'll jump ship. That's a curveball. Forget about that. I don't know what that means. So now I presented news and information sort of highlighting decisions and movements in and around Europe over the last 5 months. In response to the current conflict in the Ukraine and the threat from the Russians in Europe, to be honest, a lot of those listed pointers that I've just given you are kind of old now, old news. Anything that's older than a month is old news, really, in this climate. And I could easily provide you with another list of events covering just the last couple of weeks, shall we say. The war zone, the political landscape, and the military postures are constantly changing as we speak, with all sides, by the sounds of it, preparing for war. That's kind of how I see it. This is what I'm reading. This is what I'm seeing. I've verified 99% of this stuff. But I just want to make it clear that I'm confident in saying that 99% of those listed events, those decisions, those articles, and those signs are accurate, as per, the information from the outlets from which have been sort of verified. And if you have any doubts, please just spend some time sort of searching the web for validation yourself. It's also important to point out here that this is not scaremongering, which cannot be true if the presented information is accurate. I will present information as seen and read. There will be no alterations to boost this channel. I merely just want to provide all of viewers with meaningful information, help and advice where and when possible. The content of my videos going forward from this point on will be covering sort of negative situations, war and conflict, and video content will be of a serious nature and not for entertainment purposes. So the subject of war and conflict is a serious one, as you'll hopefully appreciate, and not to be taken lightly. The content of the up and coming sort of videos will be covering and discussing current wars unfolding sort of in front of your eyes, and sort of events that could affect you, your family and your friends. So with that in mind, if these kinds of subjects and its content sort of causes anyone any form of, I don't know, anxiety or worry, then I strongly advise you not to watch these videos sort of going forward, as they can encourage negative thoughts, which in turn can encourage and bring on sort of certain levels of stress and sort of depression, amongst other things. I'm saying this because at the beginning of my interest back in February 2022 and over the sort of months and years that followed, I have experienced various sort of levels of stress, meaning I can assure you that the military build-up, the movement of assets, and the military postures are evident, and they are changing. And with that, the Ukraine and its neighbours on our doorstep, as well as us all being a member of the same club, that being NATO, that brings with it concerns for the future, especially if you have a family to support. The whole purpose of these up and coming videos will be kind of designed to sort of take some of that doom and gloom away. From anyone who sort of may be worrying about whether these events will have an impact on them and their loved ones, I will, throughout my videos, provide my opinions and views where I feel fit to do so. And I also encourage you to do the same in any of the sort of chat sessions and sort of comment sections. I will always be open to criticism, and like all YouTube channels, there will be a flurry of trolls, no doubt. But you're all welcome. I don't give a shit about trolls. Say your piece and just move on. I will completely ignore it. I'm not interested. I'll just be providing the viewers with information, all of which will be from verified sort of sources. And to that end, I'd like nothing more, to be honest, for these conflicts around the world to sort of simmer down and present resolve through, I don't know, talking and agreements. I want nothing more than for me to be able to sort of spend my money on a holiday with the family instead of having to think about prepping. I would like to think about the future and plan for my kids growing up without the worry of this constant barrage of hate and evil sort of rearing its ugly head. But unfortunately and sadly, this is not the case. So, however, once you acknowledge and understand what's going on, the threats, the possible scenarios, and your vulnerabilities, and the available options, will make you feel a whole lot better. Because with this information, you can then begin to prepare yourself and those you love and are responsible for. So this is going to be my first piece of advice to you all, and take it how you will. But please do not think for 1 minute that you're in a safe place from some of the sort of dangers that are brewing up just because you live a couple of thousand miles away from any war zone or conflict. If you live in the UK, do not think for 1 minute that this country cannot be attacked and isn't likely to be. Unfortunately, and certainly in this country, as some of you will agree, times have changed. The introduction of the internet and all of the weird and wonderful things it brings with it. People are so consumed with social media and other platforms on the web that they may have forgotten, what is going on around them, to be honest. I've always said that there seems to be more and more people walking around in life with bubbles on their heads, meaning they have no idea nor interest in what's going on within close proximity, let alone sort of outside of the town, city, or village that they live in, and certainly not interested in what's happening in other countries, unless, of course, it's a holiday destination. So just try not to be sort of normality bias, meaning that you just don't believe anything will happen to you, your surroundings, or your life that is out of the norm. The same goes for those of you that may naturally adopt the ostrich effect. Do not think that by throwing your head in the sand and hoping that it's all just going to simply blow over is just going to go away. Hopefully for some of you, and my videos will help you, help you sort of just pull away from that normality or normalcy bias, and allow you to just better understand the dangers and therefore better prepare. Finally, I will be keeping these videos simple to start. I've not sort of invested in any sort of state-of-the-art kit, technology and tools with add-ons and premium sort of subscriptions. I can't afford that right now. And I just want to see how this channel goes. But in advance, I just want to thank you all for listening to this second video. The aim here is to just get the foundations laid out ASAP. Just with a couple of videos, really, just to give you the lay of the land, and then we can sort of get moving on sort of the information and news in real time, because that's what we want to know about. We want to know whether we're in trouble or not, whether we need to prepare, and how we need to prepare for whatever eventualities. So get yourselves military fit and infantry aware. Enough of my rubbish, and I'm off.